but they're the icing that seems expensive on what is already a very expensive cake. What is up, YouTube? Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. Between the pricing on the Z06, the E-Ray starting to come into focus, and now some rumors of a more expanded Corvette lineup, I thought it was finally time to take a look at specific builds and how to start thinking about potential changes in order to fit budgets for the C8 Z06. Specifically, I'm going to share my full planned build, subject probably to a little bit of change, as well as which options for me are on the chopping block, and potentially a couple of ways you'll want to think about potential cuts for your own builds. I'll also share one key piece of information on how you may be able to claw back some of those options and end up with just the car you wanted originally. Also, a few people recently asked me about if I've been doing any track work in the C7 Grand Sport, and in fact I have. I've been doing a bunch of autocross this year. I did really well, winning my first event, first out of 21 cars in the novice class, and then got second in my second event in the Corvette street class. I'm starting to really ramp up and I'm having a blast. Alright, enough of that, let's roll on to the C8 Z06. So before I share my build, I want to highlight a few things. First, the mindset that I'm using here on my own analysis will be viable and work for many of you. Next, with this thought exercise, you'll get out of it what you put in, and most of all, you'll get more out of it if you're honest with yourselves. And I'll get into that more in a minute. Lastly, I want to highlight an interesting poll that's gotten people talking for the last 2 weeks or so, and it plays right into this video. With the release of the pricing on the Z06 a few weeks ago, our friend Keith Cornett over at CorvetteBlogger posted a pretty interesting poll. The question it asks is how the Z06 pricing will affect your order. With a total of 2,070 total responses as of when I checked for this video, the answer, stay the same with no major changes, carries 26% with 528 votes. The answer, reduce the number of options I wanted, but still ordering one, carries 20% with 421 votes. And the answer, I'm out, priced out of the market, carries 54% of the votes with 1,111 votes. Now, rather than going further into the poll, because while interesting, I believe it provides limited value, I instead wanted to use this to highlight that there are effectively 3 options for everybody. Still getting the Z06, adjusting your spec, which is what this video focuses on, or canceling. So let's take a deeper look at the idea of adjusting your spec so that you can hopefully still get the car you want. So on the side here are one of 2 different Fred spec cars. Now this doesn't account for around $6,000 for Expel PPF on the entire car, and another $1,000 to $2,000 for the excise tax when I register the car. Those are musts for any spec that I buy, so for the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave them out. So for a quick second though, here's the rundown. It's a hardtop convertible 2LZ in Amplify Orange. I'd spec the satin graphite wheels, and I'd do the carbon flash nacelles, as well as the stealth interior and the black exhaust tips. The nose lift is something that I wish I had in my C7, and of course there's the GT2 seats, and the much desired carbon ceramic brakes. Basically, this is a minimalist function over form build, while still indulging in a couple of the niceties, because why not? Those who've been watching me for a while, or have at least watched a few of my deep dive videos and all the major options, know that I'm not much for flash that doesn't serve a purpose, at least for my intended use. So you'll notice there's no Z07 package, no carbon wheels, no fancy interior, etc. And just for fun, here are the prices next to what I hoped were the prices. Oh, how naive I was. So it seems to me like a pretty great car, but also one that's bumping pretty close to 150K, despite being light on options, or at least what I consider to be light. Aside from my house, this is going to be the most expensive thing I've ever purchased. Now comes the tough part. I just spent the last 6 months making videos talking about all the major options and why I wanted them on the car. I've built them up in my head, and I've always pictured the car with them. So how do you go about finding a few, maybe more, of those options to axe? How do you go about partially dismantling your dream so that you still get that experience you so desperately want? Now, there are no easy answers here. However, I do think there's a way. And yes, I'm keeping in mind that many of us have been waiting years for this car sitting on these lists. To be so close, yet suddenly feel like the car is again just out of reach again, is frustrating for many. I'm one of you. So how do you pick options to get rid of? Well, to start out, the way you can rule out some of the options is the same as how I approached adding them. By thinking of their intended use on the car, focusing on what matters most, and prioritizing what matters to you. Think about how you would use the car. Will you be doing frequent track driving? Will you be doing long drives on back roads? Will you be showing up at your local cruise night or cars and coffee? Do you care a lot about the little aesthetics? Or are you more interested in the driving itself? Will you spend your time bench racing with your friends talking about the car, or will you be actually trying to set your personal best at maybe a favorite track? Is this your only hobby? Your biggest hobby? One of many hobbies? Do you already own a bunch of sports cars and have plenty of options, or is this your last hurrah in retirement? All of these questions can speak to you about finding the things that matter most to you and tailoring your build to match that. Those that want to drive track, you can do with the stripped out 1LZ competition seats and CCBs. Heck, go to the steel brakes if you need to. Excellent car for around $110K. Those that want all the looks, consider equipping the aero kits with the car with the big ring and the lip spoiler, but dial back on the trim level a bit. No need for Z07 and ditch the carbon wheels, but maybe go for the Tech Bronze or some aftermarket wheels for that unique twist on a budget. Road trip or backroad cruiser, you can still get an HTC, but if you're about the experience, then don't sweat the interior of the car so much because you'll be enjoying the sights and sounds outside of the car while you're cruising. There are all kinds of ways to look at it, but ultimately this gets back to you and how honest you're being with yourself on what matters to you. There are no wrong answers, just options and your willingness to part with the money to provide them. But as I'll show you in a minute, you don't have to justify anything to anyone. Well, except maybe your wonderful spouse or significant other. And not every option has to be practical. So going back to my build as the example and my approach, right out of the gate, I can ditch some of the aesthetics. Painted nacelles, gone. Stealth interior trim, see ya! Not enough. Later front lift, I hardly knew ya. The logic there is that my C7 Grand Sport is low and doesn't have a front lift, and I've gotten used to sizing up ramps, driveways, and speed bumps. I've never scraped anything more than those rubber feelers under the front, and I know how to do the shallow angle low entry into parking lots and the like. If I think about how I've used the car in the last 5 years of ownership, I've probably only entered no more than a handful of places where the lift would have been really helpful. And none of them are my driveway or places that I frequent. What good is that memory for nose lift to store hundreds of places to lift the nose if I'm not going to use it pretty much ever? Option gone. Okay, looking at the price, I need to get a bit more serious. Carbon ceramic brakes? Maybe next time. Whoa, Fred. You've been talking about those CCBs for at least a couple months, and I thought those were pretty important. You really wanted them. I thought you needed them. Well, there's a big difference between want and need. My C7 doesn't have the carbon ceramic brakes. I don't think I've seen a single car at Autocross that has carbon ceramic brakes. Reviewing the cars in the paddock at Lime Rock Park during a track day, nope. I didn't see more than 1 or 2 sets of carbon ceramic brakes. It turns out that carbon ceramic brakes aren't really needed to explore the limits of the car. Do they provide dust-free wheels? Yes. Are they great for fade-free braking and cooling over prolonged hard driving? Yep. Necessary, though, to squeeze every bit of performance out of the car? Not in the least. In fact, if you haven't watched my deep dive on brakes, which I'll link below, you should. It turns out that pedal feel is less well-defined with carbon ceramic brakes, and that there is no appreciative improvement in braking performance with carbon ceramic brakes, just better resistance to heat fade and less brake dust. Seems like a lot to spend on those two things, yet not stopping the car any faster. Now we're getting somewhere. Look at that price. Now remember a few videos ago where I talked about pricing, and specifically I identified a price where the car was or wasn't worth it to me. The car is now under that price, which if you don't remember was $135K for me. You'll notice though that a few things didn't get cut. The Amplify orange paint, the black exhaust tips, and the GT2 seat. First, you can't compromise on comfort. That's a hard requirement for me, so the seat's gonna stay. And though I love how the car looks in pretty much every color, getting a color you love versus one you just like, to me doesn't feel like a worthwhile trade-off, so the orange paint stays. And the exhaust tips too. If $400 makes or breaks the car for you, then I'm going to stop you right now. You probably shouldn't be getting the car. Now there is one last big cut out there for me. Lurking, looming, hoping desperately not to need to be made. And that's the hardtop convertible. That's $7,000 saved if you lose it. However, that's the thing that I'd fight the hardest to keep. I firmly believe that that will be one of those features I appreciate most in a car, and having loved every convertible car I've ever driven, I'm going to fight tooth and nail to keep it. After all, we get these cars to have fun more than anything else, or at least I do, and you probably should. So in the interest of fun, let's keep that hardtop convertible. If it came down to not getting the car or getting it without, then I could lose the HTC and I'd slide in at around $121,875. But let's try to avoid that at all costs. All right, so $128,875. Sounds good, right? Well, there are a few more things we need to keep in mind. I want to take a minute to talk about that want versus need that I mentioned earlier and how to rationalize changes to your build. I hear you. Fred, I absolutely must have the red dipped interior, the colored stitching, the carbon accents, etc. Those aren't what make the car great. And in fact, those are really just window dressing. For some of us, maybe those are deal breakers. However, for the rest of us who maybe just really wanted a certain option, I offer a frame of mind. Humor me for a second. Think of the best drive you've ever done in a car. Doesn't have to be your car. Could have been a long time ago, could have been last week. Think of the memory of that drive. Now describe it to yourself. Think of what stands out. You likely can picture the feel of the air, maybe the smell of the exhausts, or the forests, or the ocean. The feeling you had when you looked out over that hood. The excitement that came when you rolled on the gas. The sound of the car perhaps, growling and burbling. Chances are you remember the scenery from the road or a track, and the feeling of the car hugging the turns, traveling a ribbon of tarmac as it wound its way across the countryside. Maybe you remember the people that were right there with you, the laughter, the enjoyment you shared as you explored wherever you were, the fun you had. That was quite a drive, wasn't it? Now what's missing? I'll tell you. Deviated stitching, trim levels, accessories, hood stripes, carbon fiber wheels. If you're being honest with yourself, I would imagine very few of you fixated on the car itself for that drive. Heck, until I looked back at the pictures while I was writing this video, I didn't even remember if the car in my memory was silver or gray. Cars like the Z06 are experience machines, and the fun you'll have doesn't necessarily translate to having all the boxes checked or showing off to others. I would imagine that the person who buys the most base 1LZ is having just as much fun as the person with the 3LZ fully loaded. So think for a minute about options that you may really need versus want strongly. This may help you draw a little bit of a line between what you're willing to cut and what you're not. And there are no wrong answers. If you can't stand to cut anything, that's fine. But if you can, know that it isn't going to diminish the core of what the car is about, the experience. As car enthusiasts, that's what we chase. But there's one more factor that I think is worth mentioning. Maybe you don't have to cut as many options as you think. Maybe not any. You see, the last time I checked, the 2023 Z06 is a pretty limited car. Production is starting 2/3 of the way into the year, and deliveries are late summer at the earliest, with many going likely into the winter. Also, the reservation lists are huge, and lots of us are way back in line. I myself am a little under 1,200 at McMulkin. So what does this do for us? Well, it does two things. First, it lets you reevaluate the ideal version of the car for yourself. I initially wanted the Z07 package, the big wing. Seeing the car in person only strengthened that resolve. However, time passed, thoughts flowed, and as I made all these Z06 option deep dive videos, I found myself having to think really critically about why I wanted each option and how I was justifying it. You can do the same with your own build. The second thing, and perhaps more helpfully, you have time. Likely lots of it. Time to save money. Skip those cups of coffee from Starbucks. Stop idly shopping for random stuff on Amazon. Cut down a little bit on eating out. That stuff adds up. It may not seem like it, but most of the options on the car by themselves aren't all that expensive compared to the cost of the car. But they're the icing that seems expensive on what is already a very expensive cake. Realistically, if I'm sweating $1,700 seats on a $120,000 car, I need to do a little bit of mental recalibration. Think about it for a second though. If you're more than a year out, and statistically, most of you watching this video are more than a year out, if you buy a $5 cup of Starbucks coffee or Dunkin' every weekday, 52 weeks a year, that's 260 cups of coffee. Right there, that's $1,300. There's basically your seats. Every so often when you want something really, really big, you're well served to scrutinize your expenses and reprioritize your money. I do it all the time. You likely have time on your side and you can make up some differences pretty quickly. Alright, now I'm not intending for any of this to sound preachy, but I think people feel like things are way more dire than they actually are. We're all incredibly fortunate to be in a situation where we can potentially afford a car like this. We're sweating over the details and stressing about the car. Make sure to take a step back every so often and realize that you're going to love any Z06 that ends up parked in your garage and then find a way to make it work. Be it saving more, cutting some unnecessary options, or probably some combination of the two. I hope this is helpful. Real quick, before I close, I'm interested in doing a questions and answer video soon. questions about the Z06, about the E-Ray, myself, or the channel, whatever strikes your fancy. I'm going to gather questions from the comments and from email, so please ask away. The best or most liked questions will get compiled into a video and put on the channel. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, Fred out!